The shelves still look normal. That is the part most people miss. You walk into a grocery store and nothing looks like a disaster. There are apples, cereal, canned soup, frozen vegetables, pasta, coffee, paper towels. The aisle is full enough to keep moving, and that is exactly why so many shoppers do not notice the pressure until it starts costing real money. Shortages usually do not begin with empty shelves. They begin with gaps, one size missing, one brand gone, one price tag that quietly jumps while everything around it still looks familiar. By the time the shelf looks obviously thin, the system has already been tightening for a while. And this is not about you doing something wrong. It is not because you failed to plan hard enough or shop cleverly enough. Grocery pressure is being built into the system through concentration, packaging limits, supply disruptions, rising energy costs, labor bottlenecks, and very thin margins at the store level. Ordinary households feel it first because ordinary households buy the same things every week. So in this video, I want to show you 9 grocery items that are quietly getting harder to find, harder to replace, or more expensive in ways most people do not notice until they are already standing in the aisle. Not because the world is ending, because the grocery system is fragile in a lot of small places at once. And I want to do more than just name them. For each one, I want you to understand why it is being squeezed, why it matters in a real household, and what you can do differently without panic buying or stuffing a garage full of food you will never use. Because the point here is not fear. The point is control. Let's start with something a lot of people overlook. The foods that make other foods work. Number 9 is sardines and mackerel. For years, canned fish was one of those quiet pantry staples that sat there in the background. Cheap protein, easy to store, ready when you need it. But that balance has been changing. Prices have risen sharply in many places, and the reason is not just store markup. Supply is being squeezed from several directions at once. Fish quotas, ocean conditions, fuel costs, and processing limits all matter here. When the catch is tighter, when transport gets more expensive, and when production cannot be expanded quickly, the shelf price starts rising long before the product disappears completely. Why does this matter in a real household? Because sardines and mackerel are not luxury foods. They are one of the few shelf-stable proteins that are compact, nutritionally dense, and ready to eat without needing much else. They bring protein, they bring fat. In the case of oily fish, they also bring nutrients that are hard to replace cheaply if you are trying to stretch meals. If you use canned fish at all, the smart move is not to chase every sale in a panic. It is to notice the pattern. If your usual brand is suddenly gone, or if the tin size has shrunk while the price stays the same, that is the signal. The store is telling you the item is becoming less stable. Storage note: keep it cool and dry and use it in a normal rotation. Buy what you will actually eat in the next several months, not what looks impressive on a shelf. Number 8 is canned tomato paste. This one sounds ordinary, and that is exactly why it matters. Tomato paste is one of those ingredients that turns dry pantry food into a real meal. Rice becomes sauce. Beans become stew. Soup tastes like food instead of water with salt in it. A small can can change the whole feel of a budget meal. But tomato products are vulnerable because the supply is concentrated. A large share of processed tomato production comes from a relatively small number of regions, and when those regions face drought, labor pressure, crop disease, or processing bottlenecks, the effects move quickly through the system. That means the shelves may still look full today, but the steady, cheap version of tomato paste can start thinning out in subtle ways. Pack sizes change. Better value multi-packs vanish. The lowest cost store brand gets replaced by a pricier version. And because the item is so small, most shoppers do not realize they are paying more for a basic meal builder until it becomes a habit. This is where consumers often get trapped. They think, it is only a few cents more. But a few cents on something used every week adds up over months. The real cost is not just price, it is flexibility. When tomato paste gets less reliable, a lot of simple meal plans get less reliable too. Storage note: keep unopened cans in a dark pantry and use the older cans first. If you cook with it regularly, the safest move is a small rotation, not a one-time stock-up. Number 7 is bulk yeast. Yeast is a tiny ingredient with a surprisingly large amount of leverage. When people think about shortages, they picture big visible things: meat, milk, eggs, produce. But sometimes the quiet problem is the small ingredient that makes a household routine work. If you bake bread, rolls, pizza dough, or even simple comfort foods at home, yeast is what keeps that routine alive. Bulk yeast is under pressure because it is a specialized product. It is not something every factory can make at scale overnight. Once demand shifts, production cannot always catch up quickly. And if home baking remains higher than it was before, that demand keeps pressure on the supply chain even when the shelves still look normal. A lot of people do not realize that the packaging format matters too. Small packets are convenient, but bulk or vacuum-sealed formats store much better and usually give you more control over cost and freshness. When those formats become harder to find, the issue is not just the ingredient. It is the ability to keep baking in a predictable way. That matters because baking at home is not only about saving money, it is about replacing uncertainty with routine. A loaf of bread is not just food, it is a plan. Storage note: if you use yeast, keep the bulk form sealed tightly and follow the package guidance. If you do not bake often, do not buy enough to become waste. Buy enough to support the bread habit you actually have. Number 6 is large format cooking oil. This one has hit a lot of households already because it is one of the most obvious examples of a basic item becoming less comfortable to buy. 1-gallon containers of cooking oil have climbed in price in many stores, and for many families it feels strange because oil is not optional. It is not a garnish. It is calories. It is cooking performance. It helps foods taste complete. It helps fat-soluble vitamins do their job in the body. And it makes a bowl of beans or rice feel like dinner instead of an emergency. So when oil gets more expensive, the real consequence is bigger than the sticker on the shelf. It affects meal quality and meal satisfaction. And that matters because families can only stretch budget meals for so long before people get tired of eating them. Oil supply has been affected by a lot of global disruptions: weather problems, crop issues, export limits, freight costs, and wider instability in agricultural markets. It does not always show up as one giant shortage. Sometimes it shows up as inconsistent stock, smaller bottles, or a price jump that makes the large container feel like a luxury item. This is one of the clearest examples of why consumers need to think in terms of value per use, not just total price. A bigger container may still be the smarter buy if it is something your household genuinely uses. But the key is to keep it in a normal rotation. Do not buy oil as a trophy. Buy it as a tool. Storage note: keep it away from heat and direct light and use it before it turns. If you rarely cook with it, buy less. If you use it weekly, watch the large container carefully, because that is often where the best value used to be. Now let me pause here, because this is the point in the list where people can start to feel the wrong thing. Not fear, not panic, discouragement. So let's reset this the right way. What we are really talking about is a pantry system. Not hoarding, not a bunker, not buying 20 of everything and hoping the world behaves. Just a small rotating reserve of foods that protect 3 things at once: your budget, your nutrition, and your flexibility. That means you are not trying to predict the future. You are trying to reduce your dependence on the exact condition of any one shopping trip. A pantry system works because some foods are good at being the backbone, and some foods are good at making the backbone livable. Rice and beans are a backbone. Oil, tomato paste, bouillon, canned fish, honey, and shelf-stable dairy are what keep that backbone from feeling like a punishment. If you understand that, you stop shopping like a victim of the shelf and start shopping like the owner of a system. That is the shift. And once you see that shift, the rest of the list makes more sense. Number 5 is bulk bouillon. This is one of the most underrated items in the whole pantry. Bouillon is not exciting. It is not the kind of thing people post about. But when groceries get expensive, flavor becomes a financial issue. Because when meals taste better, people waste less food. They are more willing to eat what is already in the house. They are less likely to order takeout just because dinner feels bleak. Bulk bouillon gives you a way to turn water and simple ingredients into broth, soup, sauce, or a base for almost anything. Compared with canned broth, it is usually much more efficient in storage and often more flexible in use. The supply issue here is subtle. Bulk formats are more specialized, and not every store keeps a deep supply. Warehouse stores may carry it for a while and then suddenly thin it out. Packaging changes can also make it harder to find the format you used to buy. That is how a practical pantry item quietly becomes inconsistent. If you are building a reserve, this is one of the safest items to include because it has a long usefulness window and a small footprint. A little goes a long way. Storage note: keep it sealed and dry. If your household already uses broth often, this is a strong candidate for the 2 items per trip plan we will get to at the end. Number 4 is shelf-stable bacon. This one surprises people because bacon does not sound like a preparedness food. It sounds like breakfast. But that is exactly why it matters. Shelf-stable bacon can add fat, salt, aroma, and a sense of normalcy to meals that might otherwise feel too bare. A small amount can make rice, potatoes, eggs, beans, or vegetables feel like an actual dinner. That psychological value matters more than people realize. When food gets expensive, households do not only suffer from less food, they suffer from less satisfaction. The meals become repetitive. The family gets tired. People start reaching for convenience foods because the pantry food feels too plain. That is how budgets leak. Shelf-stable bacon is useful because it can bridge that gap. But it is also more vulnerable than people think. Specialty formats can be discontinued, backordered, or kept in smaller quantities because they are not high-volume staples in every store. When the product gets harder to find, it often happens quietly. So if your household actually uses it, this is the kind of item that deserves attention before it becomes a memory on the shelf. Storage note: follow the package instructions carefully. Shelf-stable does not mean forever once opened. Use it as part of your real meals, not as a decorative emergency item. Number 3 is canned butter. This is where the list starts to feel a little unusual, and for good reason. Canned butter is not something most shoppers think about every day. But that is also why it can vanish before people notice. It is a niche product with limited commercial production. That makes it vulnerable to facility issues, packaging constraints, and supply interruptions that do not affect the butter aisle in obvious ways. Why does it matter? Because butter is one of those foods that quietly improves almost everything: bread, potatoes, vegetables, pan sauces, baking, comfort food, even simple toast. It adds calories and satisfaction in a way margarine or oil does not always replace cleanly. Shelf-stable butter also preserves value over time better than a lot of fresh dairy formats. That is useful in a household where you want a little insurance against price spikes, refrigeration disruptions, or simply not wanting to run to the store every few days. This is not a product everybody needs. But if your household uses butter regularly, it is worth noticing whether the shelf-stable version is still available at all, and whether the packaging or price has changed. Storage note: keep it in a cool, dry place and respect the date on the package. This is not a reason to stockpile endlessly. It is a reason to understand which versions of a familiar food are becoming less dependable. Number 2 is pull-tab evaporated milk. This is one of the clearest examples of how shortages often start quietly, in forms most people barely think about. Evaporated milk is one of those items that can do a lot of jobs. It works in coffee, it works in baking, it helps with sauces and casseroles. It is useful when fresh milk is not available, or when you want a shelf-stable dairy option for backup. And the pull-tab version matters because it is convenience plus shelf stability. But that convenience also makes it vulnerable when manufacturers cut back or simplify production. In many stores, the real warning sign is not total disappearance. It is partial shelves. One day there are 5 cans, then 3, then 1. Then suddenly that little section just never seems to refill properly. That is why shoppers miss it. Because the store still looks functional, the dairy section still looks normal, but the product you counted on quietly fades out. If you use evaporated milk for coffee or cooking, this is a good item to watch closely. It is a very practical pantry bridge between fresh dairy and shelf-stable backup. Storage note: keep cans dry and organized. If you buy it, use the older cans first and keep the newer cans behind them. Simple rotation prevents waste and keeps your reserve honest. Number 1 is large format honey. This is the longest-lasting item on the list, and in many ways the smartest one to notice early. Honey is unusual because, under normal conditions, it does not spoil in the way most foods do. That does not mean it never changes texture or crystallizes. But as a shelf-stable sweetener and quick energy source, it has a rare kind of resilience. Large format honey is becoming harder to find in some places, especially the big value containers people used to buy without much thought. That can happen because of import scrutiny, adulteration concerns, sourcing issues, and the simple fact that bigger containers are not always the first priority in a tight market. Why does this matter in a real household? Because honey does several useful jobs at once. It sweetens tea. It spreads on bread. It can replace sugar in some uses. It provides quick energy. And it is one of the few pantry items that can sit quietly for a very long time without much drama. If a household wants one sweetener that offers storage value, honey is hard to ignore. But again, the key is not to buy more than you use. It is to understand why a larger format can be a smart part of a reserve if it is part of your actual routine. Storage note: keep the lid sealed and use clean utensils. If it crystallizes, that is usually a texture issue, not a failure. The practical value remains. So now look at the whole pattern. Sardines and mackerel give you compact protein. Tomato paste makes dry staples into meals. Yeast gives you bread and routine. Oil gives you fat, calories, and satisfaction. Bouillon makes cheap food taste like real food. Shelf-stable bacon adds appeal and flexibility. Canned butter protects familiar richness. Pull-tab evaporated milk covers coffee, baking, and backup dairy. Honey gives you long shelf life and sweetener security. That is not a random list. That is a pantry structure. It tells you how the pressure works. The most fragile grocery items are often not the flashy ones. They are the practical ones. The ingredients that make lower-cost food livable. The items that help a household keep eating normally when prices keep shifting. And that brings us to the part that actually changes your week. What do you do with this information? Not panic, not stockpile, not start a giant project. You make 3 ordinary shopping trips, and on each trip you buy just 2 items from this list. 2 items per trip. That is it. If you shop this week, maybe you pick oil and tomato paste. Next trip, bouillon and honey. The trip after that, evaporated milk and sardines, or whatever 2 items you actually use. The goal is not quantity for its own sake. The goal is to slowly build a reserve that feels calm, useful, and rotated. That way, you are never trying to catch up all at once. You are not fighting the shelf in a panic. You are simply making your home less exposed to the next round of price jumps and empty spots. And if you are not sure where to begin, start with the foods your household already knows how to use. That is the simplest rule. Buy what you eat what you store what you rotate. If you do that, you are not preparing out of fear. You are protecting your money from waste, your kitchen from chaos, and your family from the stress of depending completely on a system that keeps showing small cracks. The shelves may still look normal today. That is exactly why this is the right time to pay attention. If you want, tell me in the comments which one of these items has gotten hardest to find in your area. And if this helped, stay with us, because the more you understand how these grocery patterns work, the easier it becomes to shop with calm instead of pressure.